monitors situated, and then I will begin sharing. Between 3 monitors, it's always a challenge to have the right window. Okay, let me pick this one to share, and then y'all let me know when you can see it.
We can see it.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So welcome everybody. It's meant to be just a very informal gathering intended to kind of help provide this general overview to regional water planning as a whole. And then I break it into how is this Region E specific so that the new members joining Region E have a better foundation to kind of spring off of, especially knowing next week we have another regional water planning group meeting. And I wanted each of you to feel very confident and comfortable with where we're at in this 5-year planning process, because it's tough to come in the middle and then have all these acronyms, or alphabet soup is what I call it, thrown at you in all of our conversations. So, and I want you guys to participate and really feel like you've got a spot inside the planning group and help support the efforts in developing this new regional water plan that should reflect, you know, our region specifically. So I hope this is helpful. Peggy, I'm going to be focused on my slides and the content. So if there's questions in the chat or a hand raised, please just stop me and let me know, or feel free to just kind of holler out and I will stop the content and take questions as we go. Okay, so really, I wanted to break down like what is regional water planning? How did regional water planning come to exist? So the Water Development Board was created in response to the 1950s drought. And at that time, the state did not have a good guidance document that could help communities find water supplies during an emergency. So that really woke up the state. And they realized at that time, okay, we need to, moving forward, have some kind of plan in place that can, one, indicate to communities where they go during a time of drought, where emergency connections are, what backup plans you might have, but also, you know, maybe more importantly, just the day in and day out, year after year, where's the growth happening? How are communities, you know, going to expand to accommodate new growth and new demand? So they came up with this first state water plan in 1961. So kind of the bottom pictures here. But from 1961 through 1997, the approach to developing this state water plan was what we call a top-down approach. So it was really developed by planners sitting in Austin. And that became a huge concern to communities statewide when you think about, you know, how does a handful of folks in the capital know what's happening on the west side of the state as far as like our Region E, or what about the east side of the state where we've got, you know, our Region D, Region I, and there's a drastic change in geography and climate depending on where you're at in our state. So in 1997, new legislation was passed, which we call Senate Bill 1, which changed this process to incorporate the local, regional, and public participation. And this is now known as a bottoms-up approach. And this began to develop regional water plans that could accurately reflect, you know, grassroots, boots on the ground type of situations. And so you were getting a state water plan that was more concise and more exact and more detailed. And it had a lot of good feedback and input from these local areas. So that first state water plan that was a bottoms-up approach representing these local interests was our 2022 state water plan. So one thing to kind of keep in mind when we throw out titles of these plans, the regional water plan that is going to be used to develop the state plan is submitted the year before. So currently we're working on our 2026 regional water plan. And in a minute, you know, I'll show you how many plans there are across the state. So 2026 is going to be regional water plans. There'll be 16 of those that get developed and submitted to the board. And then the board uses that to create the 2027 state plan, which is like a summary of those 16 plans coming into one state plan. So the region is divided into 16, or the state is divided into 16 regions. And here on this slide, you'll see a bunch of different names. What's interesting is each region is going to be like Region A, Region B, Region C, Region F. But notice Far West Texas doesn't have Region E in parentheses. So this is just something you're going to learn over time as you spend more time diving into it and being with the planning group. But these are the names of the various regions, and then all of them have, assigned to them, whether they're Region A, which is Panhandle up at the top, Region E, which is our Far West Texas on the left. And so depending on who's speaking, you might get a little confused at first if they're just going to say Region G and you're like, where is that in the state? That's our Brazos G, kind of like north middle. But over time, you'll get used to it. Carollo primes in 4 regions, so we're very, very experienced in regional water planning. We prime not just in the Far West Texas Region E, but we also prime in the Northeast Texas, all the way on the right-hand side. That's Region D. The Plateau is kind of that hill country area of the state. That's Region J. And then our Brazos G is Region G. And in addition to that, we also sub on other regions where we offer some expertise or client relationships that we've had since the inception of planning. In the Far West Texas region and in the Plateau region, the former engineering firms that I've been with, we've had those contracts since the inception of planning. So we've planned in these areas for 25 plus years. So in addition to providing other areas of the state, our experience in not just what the Water Development Board's rules and guidance is for creating a regional water plan, we've had relationships in the Far West Texas region and in the Plateau region since the inception of planning. And so when you've got 30 plus years of relationships, it really, really goes a long way in developing a very solid regional water plan amongst many other things. Each regional water plan takes 5 years, so that's why I'm offering this class, because when you jump into it mid-cycle, you've got 2.5, 3 years before you joined where we were busy, developing content that we're building on, and when you come into the middle, you kind of feel a little lost. So hopefully this presentation helps to solidify in your mind a little bit more what we've done and why we're at where we're at and what it is that we have to accomplish moving forward. So Region E specifically is comprised of a total of 7 counties. I kind of pulled some high-level summary of our Chapter 1 to just give you background about our region. All of the counties inside Region E reside within one river basin, so the Rio Grande River Basin, which makes a lot of the data compilation pretty easy when you're just dealing with one river basin. There are other regions where there's 9 river basins in your region, and that starts to get a little complicated. Apart from El Paso County, the counties of the Far West Texas are among the least populated in the state. The region's population is projected to increase from about 1,022,933 in 2030 to about 1,104,003 in 2080. I'll circle back on population here in a minute. One neat thing about Region E is the counties inside Region E claim some of the most impressive topography in all of the state. In our region, we are home to the Guadalupe Mountains National Park, Big Bend National Park, and the contiguous Big Bend Ranch State Park. So a lot of neat geography and topography in our region. Circling back to population, one thing I want you guys to kind of keep in mind is the Water Development Board, with the census that happened in 2022, provided us population projections. When we got those population projections, there were a few things within our data set and all data sets across the state that didn't jive with what we had used in the past plan. So there was growing concern around how accurate are these population projections, especially with COVID that we've just received. So working with the Water Development Board, we had helped them become aware of some kind of like undercount. There was an undercount across the nation for Black and Hispanics in certain areas. And so in looking at that data, we were able to apply a percentage of where that undercount occurred and help boost some of our population projections up to more accurately reflect some of the growth that we do feel is happening in Region E. In addition to that, we surveyed every entity and said, hey, can you produce any form of documentation, whether it's the plats that are being subdivided or the number of connections, anything that'll help us justify that, even with the undercount, it's still not accurately reflecting the growth that you think is coming into your area. And so we pulled together all that data, we created a revision request letter, and we sent that to the Water Development Board, and they reviewed the revision request letter and did grant us the right to alter some of our data to better reflect what was happening on the actually in those communities. Guys, give me 2 seconds. The puppies just ran into the bedroom where I'm presenting and I need to scoot them out. So give me just like 2 seconds.
No problem.
Hey. Okay. I am back. We found.
Jennifer, could you
Yeah.
just a quick question because it might inform my other work.
Yeah.
Could you just clarify again? So the population data was updated. It was based on census or getting with each community, or what exactly? How was that updated?
Yes. So the Water Development Board requires us to use census-based population, and that data set was updated to include a national undercount for different areas in our region. And we were able to produce documentation that justifies growth in certain areas. For example, the what is it? Blue Origin? Is that the name of the? Okay,
Yes.
that was one of many examples where the growth there can't keep up. The housing development can't keep up with the growth. We've got workers and families living in motels for extended, time. And so we were able to produce some documentation for certain areas that said, no, we really think the population should be this. And the Water Development Board agreed to all the documentation that we provided. So in our regional water plan, that data set that you'll see in Chapter 2 reflects those revised numbers.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's
Yep.
actually really interesting. I know in Presidio, there's always discussion about population and what's documented, so I'll be reviewing all of that.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so you'll want to go grab off of the COGS website the Chapter 2 draft that went out at our previous meeting. And there is a write-up regarding Presidio, but then also what Region E has done is they've asked a professor or two at UTEP to go under contract with the COG and do like an interim study on the population specific to Region E. And then we're going to get results from that. Apparently, it was supposed to be August, and I haven't heard, so maybe they're just running a little bit behind. But there'll be population data coming out of that UTIP study. And so it'll be interesting to see how that compares to what we have in the plan, right now. So more to come on that.
Thank you.
Jennifer, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And I kind of had that comment. I had written it down on my notes after reviewing the documents you sent me.
Yeah.
And at first it didn't click in my head, right? The percentage in population growth. Just me thinking, I guess, on a limited scale, I'm focusing on, at the time I was focusing on El Paso County, right? And I'm like, but there's growth everywhere, right? And so is that study taking into account, I think it's our economic development team that focuses on bringing in companies and things like that, right? Like Meta, I believe already became public, that is moving down the street from one of our power plants. And so with that type of company coming in the next few years, and others that I don't know all the details about, is that accounted for in this type of study at all?
So I don't know what the study's going to account for because I haven't seen it at all. All I was informed of is that Region E pulled together some funds and contracted with some folks at UTEP because they just weren't very happy about the population projections that the board provided, even with our undercount applied and all of the surveying work we did. It still didn't seem to accurately reflect the growth that they're seeing in their counties and in their communities. So until I get my hands on that study, I'm not sure what UTEP, generated. But what I will say is the regional water plan is the one document where, yes, you have to follow the board's guidelines and use the data that they approve and vet, but you also have the flexibility to write in there that, for example, maybe if that study does not account for that new company coming in, we include in a paragraph to that steam electric, section that this company is coming in, and because of that, there's going to be an increase in growth that may not be reflected in the data today, but we would like for that to be reflected in the plan moving forward, or whatever it is. We have the flexibility to write what we want in the plan.
Yeah, and I just bring it up because I hear some of the conversations when we have our VP come in and give us an update on our next plan, right? What the plan is for the next 5 years. And extending the life of units that were to be retired, or other companies like Meta that I don't know the names to, but are considering El Paso as their home in the next 5 years. And so it's hard to think about what that would. I don't know. I don't have the skill, right, to or the experience to predict, what the projection would be. But I would assume that would be something that we would state.
Yeah.
If needed, right? If needed.
Yes, and we can work offline because I know the Water Development Board does use data that pulls in various surveys that they're required to submit that says, okay, these plants are actually active. These plants have, become inactive. And so again, though, you're talking about a 5-year process, and that work is done early on at the first year, second year. And we're beyond that now. So if things are shifting and changing, we don't pick that up until the next go around. But that's why you're allowed to write content in that says, we know this is happening. It may not be reflective in that data set. So there's some freedom there to add some text.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
One more comment, and just being mindful that we're representing the whole 7 counties, even though we kind of have our areas we might specialize in. And with my planning background, knowing that population modeling and projection, it's really the underpinning of this whole process. So I'll look forward to just understanding better how we're modeling the population and how all of that's being applied to determine demand.
Yes. So
Sorry, I just responding to that, right? Again, going back to reading what the information that I had, I felt as focusing on steam power, I'm thinking about a region, right? So it's a little bit hard to kind of step back and look at it as a big picture and encompass all of the counties. One of the statements was, I think we were the only power generation company in the area. And I'm like, no, we're not. And I went back and I researched, all the areas. I'm like, that's true. I did not know that. So it's hard to step back and see it from like an overview, and remove myself from being an El Paso Electric employee. So definitely keeping in mind.
Yes. Yeah, and at the beginning of chapter 2, we talk about the methodologies used for population projections and water demand. So I do encourage y'all to kind of look through that, because I walk us through, how we got to our final data set based on the guidance that the board says we have to use. Okay, so moving
Roberto?
on.
I think
yes.
Roberto has something to ask or comment.
Just wanted to add a resource, Jennifer. If you need how much water Meta is going to use and the type of water users that we have in the queue, just wanted to offer that resource in case it could be plugged into the study, right? I don't know at what phase is the study at, but just wanted to offer that. Yes, that's just wanted to offer that as a resource. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
And,
Yeah,
and
I think
also the other thing, who's doing the study at UTEP?
that I don't know. So I have
Okay,
some
all right.
follow-up emails to some individuals who were kind of staying apprised with that, and I haven't heard back yet. So I am just as curious as you as to, who completed the work and when is the study going to be done. They said end of August we would have the study, and I haven't seen it yet. So I think they're probably running a little behind, but maybe by the 10th at our planning group meeting, there'll be more information that Peggy and I can dig up for everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so how does regional water planning work? Well, this is going to be kind of high level because we could spend hours, getting you guys acquainted with all the guidance documents and the guidelines that the board asks us to use. But basically, these planning groups are made up of about 20 members representing a variety of interests. Each regional water plan takes 5 years to develop. On the screen now and it's small, I understand, but this is kind of our working schedule that the Water Development Board requires us to follow. The red circle is where we're at with our scope of work. It's a broad circle, it just kind of collects, the September, October, November of 2024 work. And we'll speak a little bit more in detail about what we're doing and what's next. But at the end of the day, this red cell here that says this initially prepared plan, so this is our draft regional water plan, it's due back to the Water Development Board by March 4th of 2024. So we're down to like maybe 6-7 more months to get everything, written and approved. That's why there's been this big push asking for updates and feedback and redline revisions, because there's 10 chapters to the plan, and we've got to start presenting those chapters in front of the planning group and ask for their approval of our final drafts so we can move on to the next chapter and so on and so forth. The final plans are due back to the Water Development Board by October 20th of 2025. So we're more than halfway through, but we're in that scope of work phase where it's the heaviest, it's the largest amount of work that we've got to complete, and there's some of the tightest deadlines just around the corner. So it's really critical that we stay on time and we participate when asked, and we hit deadlines, because I'll get to a point where I can't be as flexible and I'll just have to say, okay, Chapter 4 is what it is. I didn't get everybody's feedback in, but it'll have to just, move on. And that's really hard for someone like me who really wants each chapter to be very reflective of the communities, and then know at the end of the day, some is and some is not, and we'll catch it during the next cycle of planning. So those 20 or 20 plus members in a planning group represent these types of entities. And, This is just an example of Region E and who's being represented, but we have municipalities and small business and counties. We have environmental and agricultural and tourism, all the way to, of course, our water districts, our water utilities, our groundwater management areas, our steam electric entities, economic development, and building and real estate. This pretty much covers the types of interests that are being represented on the Region E planning group, and these areas are probably represented in all the other planning groups across the state. So a lot of good input coming in that has to be compiled into one regional water plan. Each planning group, so the structure of this regional water planning group and how do we operate within a framework that is, not only approved by the planning group, but more importantly, approved by the Water Development Board, who ultimately holds the contract. So the Water Development Board holds the contract with a political subdivision. Our political subdivision is the Rio Grande Council of Governments. And the Rio Grande and the planning group then have to select a technical consultant. And then there's a contract written up there that ties the Rio Grande Council of Governments to Carollo as their technical consultant. Each 5 years, planning groups have to go out for a formal, bid where they do a request for proposals. Engineering firms that are interested in the work put together a proposal. The planning group then has to come up with like a, weighted system, how to grade those proposals, and then they select their technical consultants. I'll tell you this, the state has 16 regions with fabulous technical consultants sitting within the regions. Many of them, like Region E, have had their consultants since the inception of planning. And so there's hardly any movement into like a new engineering firm coming on because, like I said, after 20, 25 years with your technical consultant, you've got institutional knowledge, you've got historical knowledge that doesn't sit with anyone else, that makes the plan for the next cycle that much more unique, that much more valuable. And let's remind everybody, the state doesn't adjust their budget, so there's more work always added to the scope of work, but then the state doesn't increase the budget. So you really need a technical consultant that has no learning curve, that can just come in and have that ease of relationships and knowledge to the region. So in addition to having a political subdivision, the planning groups do have to approve bylaws. How are they going to govern their methods of conducting business? So the planning group approved bylaws way back at the beginning of planning. And from time to time, we have to look at them and then, maybe update them and then have them reapproved. And so we have our bylaws that govern, our work that kind of mirrors what the Water Development Board is saying we need to do. So lots of safety nets and checks and balances in place. If you were to look at a regional water plan as a project, because it is, I hope most of you have seen kind of an org chart. This is a very simplified org chart. If I was to structure, what this looks like, it would be best represented by putting the Far West Texas Regional Water Planning Group, long acronym, at the very top as kind of our project manager to this project. And then if you come down that vein, you see there's room for that public input and stakeholders' interests and things like that to kind of come in and be a part of what's being developed. And then along the bottom, you have what's serving and supporting, that Far West Texas Planning Group is the Water Development Board. So that's our state level, and they set those rules and guidelines that we have to follow. You then have your technical consultant, and in Region E, it is Carollo. And then you also have the political subdivision who's responsible for administering the planning process and managing our contracts. So it does take a village to make a regional water plan depict the accurate, scenarios that are happening year after year. So that planning group has responsibilities. They have a lot of responsibilities, but with relation to the development of the regional water plan, they have to consider other local plans and public input. So, we have to look at, sometimes there's long-range water management strategy plans that we need to consider. There's definitely drought contingency plans that we have to consider and water management plans that we have to consider. We have to look at and evaluate current water supplies. We have to identify water needs or where we have a surplus of water. We then develop these water management strategies to meet shortages or water needs. And then you have to evaluate those, the impacts of those water management strategies. And then we do develop a drought information chapter. That's chapter 7 of the regional water plan. And then the planning group is responsible for providing feedback, any red line revisions, and adopting final chapters all along the way that allows us then to adopt this final draft plan that goes to the board in March. So this is just a snippet of the task budget that's in one of our contracts, and I thought it would be very helpful for you guys to see the work we've done and what work we still have to complete. And so to break it down, there are 10 major chapters in a regional water plan. However, if you notice, the scope of work has a few more line items because we've got a 2A and a 2B. So it's not just a one, like just a chapter 2. We have a 4A, 4B, 4C, but in our regional water plan, it's just chapter 4. But you'll begin to see that there's a lot of items that go into the development of each of the chapters. And when they're specific enough to warrant a breakout in our scope of work, you'll see where we have, an A, B, and C for a chapter 4, but each thing is having us focus on something unique, and there's money tied to that. So, the board is giving us X amount of dollars to do water needs analysis. But then also in chapter 4, we have to look at any infeasible water management strategies, and so on and so forth. And so we've completed basically all the work to get us a draft chapter 2. And we've completed 4B and 4C. So at the last meeting, draft chapter 1 and draft chapter 2 came out for the planning group's review and feedback. And I'm still collecting any kind of information I can get regarding, sections in those chapters. Next week at our meeting, I'll be providing a draft chapter 3 and a draft chapter 4 that's kind of tying up, these 3 scope items into one chapter. And I'll be asking and soliciting, feedback from planning group members and water entities and stakeholders for those 3 chapters or for those 2 chapters. Why we're not going to approve chapter 2 at our meeting next week is because this UTEP study needs to find a home into our regional water plan, because there was interest with some of our executive committee members where we show, okay, the board says we have to use this data set, but the region feels that the study coming from UTEP actually depicts more accurately the growth that's occurring in our counties. And so there's going to be a second subset of data and write-up that's got to find its home into chapter 2. And I haven't done that yet because I haven't seen the study. So we're going to wait on approving our chapter 2 until I can work that, new language in. But it kind of gives you an idea of how many more things we've got to accomplish and get those draft chapters, written up by March, when this whole draft plan has to go out to the Water Development Board for review. So we're right here with our chapter 5 work, meaning, we've looked at population. Population was the driver for our water demand projections. Water demand compared to our water supply shows us where we've got needs or surpluses. And then the board says, hey, anywhere you have a shortage, you have to come up with a water management strategy to take care of that water shortage. Now, anyone within the region can ask to have a water management strategy be represented in the water plan, whether there's a shortage or not. But the board's requirement is at least you develop strategies for all shortages. So that's where we're at, is starting to look at our water management strategies in the previous plan and begin to do the work of reaching out to water entities and asking, hey, are these strategies still valid? Do the details need to be updated? Are there new strategies that need to be represented that we didn't know about in the last plan? Do some of these strategies come off? It's a huge undertaking. It's 90% of the work inside this 10-chapter plan. So there'll be a lot of emails, I'm sure, coming out that I could use y'all's help with. Okay, high level though, if we don't get into the weeds with all the 10 chapters and the scope of work that goes with it, you could kind of look at regional water planning as a trifecta. So this is known, if you're a senior planner, regional water planning trifecta. And what that really means is you look at your water demand projections, and they are a function of population, which is population projections, your baseline gallons per capita per day, your GPCD, and this projected plumbing code savings aspect. Then, establishing these accurate water demand estimates for all water use categories is a major component of water planning. This is going to answer the question, how much water do we need? And all those details kind of get wrapped up in Chapter 2. So really encourage you to go back and read through Chapter 2. And then in Chapter 3, we explore the current and future availability of all water supply resources in the region, including our surface water, our groundwater, and our reuse. Water supply availability from each recognized source is estimated during drought of record conditions. So this is important to remember. For regional water planning, we plan for drought of record conditions. This allows each entity and water use category to evaluate conditions when their supply source is at its most critical availability level. Remember, regional water plans were a response to the 1950 drought of record. So it's continued to be kind of like the backbone of planning. You plan for that drought of record. And then you move into your water management strategies, which are plans on how to meet an identified water need for additional water by an entity, which can mean either you're increasing that total water supply or maximizing an existing supply, which can include reducing demand. And a lot of times, this comes with some of our conservation measures. And so Chapter 5 and Appendix 5A is completely dedicated to the identification and evaluation of all our water management strategies. And that's the work that we're just starting from the last meeting to this meeting. There's been some survey work that's been ongoing, and we'll have more information around, how much we've been able to update in, 4 weeks, 5 weeks. And we still have time to continue to get our Chapter 5 and 5A in order. So the trifecta is the demands compared to your supplies, and then what water management strategies need to come on to meet those shortages. Okay, putting that on pause for just a minute, I thought it would be good to kind of show you some graphics that take you back in time when you weren't a part of the planning group, so you have some kind of knowledge moving forward. But Chapter 2, population, according to the board's data set, plus our undercount revisions, plus all the surveying we did, we got our numbers up as far as we could. And this graph kind of represents the 2030 population projections, of which 98% of our population in Region E resides in El Paso County, and they are either serviced by El Paso Water, about 77% are, or by other relatively smaller systems in the county. And this is a graphic inside Chapter 2. You can read more around it when you go to review that chapter. Then you switch over to demands, same 2030 projection. So for the 2030 to 2080 decades, the total water demand in the region is projected to increase from 598,338 acre feet to 611,435 acre feet. So what you'll typically see is when your population increases throughout the planning horizon, we plan for 50 decades, so 2030, 2040, 2050, all the way to 2080, your water demand will also follow that trend. All right, something to be very mindful of when you dive into chapter 3 is source availability and supply capacity are two very different things. And the best way I can explain it, because you may be thinking like, why is there a glass of water as an image? Keep that in mind. Water availability, so source availability is how much water resides within each of the unique water supply sources. So is it groundwater, which we have major and minor aquifers? Is it our surface water, primarily, our the Rio Grande River, Pecos River? Is it reuse? And we have something called local supplies, which are typically like stock ponds that are used for irrigation and livestock. So your availability is just how much water sits inside these various different sources. Okay. Don't lose that train of thought. I just wanted to kind of show you the aquifers for Region E. We have some of the most complex in the state. We have 3 major aquifers that were designated by the Water Development Board, and we have 10 aquifers designated by the planning group. So you can see how active and involved your planning group members have been over the course of 5 regional water plans. So it's pretty fascinating to see how diverse the region is. Okay, but back to the water in the cup. Now, our supply capacity is the amount that can be physically accessed. So if you think about your aquifer might have X amount of water, but then your straw or your pipeline that taps into that aquifer can only pull out, a certain amount. That amount that's getting pulled out of that aquifer is the volume of water that, let's say, El Paso actually can access. Even though the aquifer may have a lot more, the infrastructure is only allowing for, a subset of that, or legal limitations like contracts and sales only allows you to pull out of that source of water, a certain amount. So you have your water availability, which is the source and the amount of water in that source, but then your supply capacity is water supplies that are available to municipal utilities and other water user categories that are based on your current infrastructure or legal limitations and the physical availability of water from each source. So best way that I can, drive that point home is the straw that taps into that source. It's whatever that straw's ability is to pull water out. That's really, at the end of the day, what an entity has. Then, if we look at how does this roll into the needs, so you have your availability, you've got your aquifer, you have your supply, so that straw that pulls the water out is probably a smaller volume. And then you have these demands on that volume of water that your straw has been able to pull out. Is your water supply coming through that straw large enough to carry all the demands, or are the demands exceeding that volume of water coming out of your straw? And if it's exceeding, then you have a need and you have a shortage. And that's when the Water Development Board says, okay, we need to plan for that entity on how they're going to continue to have water supply meet their growing needs or their growing demand. So this graphic just kind of shows you, it's easiest to kind of use El Paso Water as an example. So El Paso Water has an integrated water plan, meaning they have both groundwater, so call that A, and they have surface water. And they use that blended supply, they bring it in off of those sources, and they are the provider that then has a handful of contracts and agreements to customers. And these customers now are becoming that demand on that supply. And for El Paso Water, they have enough currently right now with the way that they've got this infrastructure and this blended system. They have enough water to meet the 2030 demands. But by 2040, they're going to run short. And from 2040 on, they have to come up with what we call integrated water management strategies to help continue to pull, water from various sources or blend it or expand a wastewater treatment plant or whatever they decide to do in order to continue to meet these growing demands. Okay, questions on how we get to our needs, because that's really going to be chapter 3 and chapter 4, which is presented next week. Okay, almost ready to wrap up because I know we're getting close to the hour. So now we've got to develop these water management strategies, and these water management strategies have some criteria around them. The Water Development Board is very prescribed on what we do when we're developing, what we have to consider, how we even cost to them, so that all 16 plans across the state aren't coming up with their own approach and then how does the board put together that state water plan? So they've come up with a unified costing tool that helps all 16 regions use the same tool to generate the costs. And that's just one example of all the different criteria around developing water management strategies. But basically, we have to look at quantity and cost and reliability. We have to look at any environmental impact and impacts on natural resources, agriculture, and water quality. And if you are interested in what this looked like in the previous plan, you can go to the Water Development Board's website, and under water planning, there is a drop down where you can access any of the 2021 regional water plans across the state. And if you just go to chapter 5, you'll start to see how this comes together to form a chapter. And in Region E, in our Appendix 5A, we go entity by entity by entity, and all of the strategies that they came to us with are described in its own little write-up. So you can see how we evaluated those strategies based on the board's criteria. The Water Development Board also says, that you have to consider, but you're not limited to, these following potentially feasible. So you need to look for conservation and drought management and reuse and so on and so forth. And they've listed 24 potentially feasible water management strategies that could be used to help absorb a water shortage somewhere. But they're also saying, hey, there's flexibility for an entity to come up with something other than what's on this list. But bare minimum, this is the list you at least have to start with. Okay, so there's oftentimes some frequently asked questions when it comes to regional water planning, and I compiled just a few slides to discuss like what have those questions been historically when I've given the presentation. Felt like that was a good starting point to just answer maybe some ideas or questions that you're thinking of now. But if there are other questions you have not addressed here, do speak up, because I'm always interested to hear how this PowerPoint generates other thoughts and provokes questions. So oftentimes we're asked, like, do projects have to be specifically listed in the regional water plans to receive funding? This is a very important question because about 2 planning cycles ago, the Water Development Board said anybody, any entity over here kind of in this box that is interested in coming in for SWIFT funding, which we'll talk about here in a minute, you have to have your strategy in the regional water plan to even be eligible to apply. So regional water plans became a funding mechanism about 2 planning cycles ago, which kind of changed the flair and the taste of how we did regional water planning historically. Now it's very much focused on entities making sure that their strategies, whether they're going to activate them, in 2030 or not until 2080, that they're in the plan and they're mentioned, because if they want to come in and use the SWIFT funding, which is, a low interest loan, it beats all other loans in the state. the first thing the Water Development Board is going to do is going to go into the regional water plan and look to see if it's in the plan. And if it's not, you're not even eligible to apply. So the work we're doing right now to update Chapter 5 is so important because there's a lot of people who have, an interest in getting their strategies in so that they can be eligible for SWIFT funding at any point in time. So the answer is yes. What type of financing is available? The Water Development Board has all sorts of financing and funding. It's not just SWIFT. There's grants and loans that help, the distressed, economically distressed areas. There's all sorts of, information on their website under funding, but they make it possible to fund a project from the planning phase to the design phase to the permitting and acquisition, and then finally the construction phase. So if you're interested and want more information, just reach out to me and I can connect you with some of their funding members, because they're just like a wealth of information. So we've talked a little bit about who's eligible to apply. Basically anybody, coming in and wanting the Water Development Board's help to support a project, a water project. There's just all sorts of, people who can come in and apply, and what kinds of projects are eligible. So in the regional water plan, when we work with entities on their list of water management strategies, they have to let us know which ones they're going to recommend and which ones are alternate. And so there's two different types of strategies that get detailed out in Chapter 5. These recommended and alternate strategies go through the same process for evaluation. So the cost and the impacts and all of that is the same. But basically what El Paso Water is going to tell me is, here's 12 water management strategies that are going to help us meet our needs between 2030 and 2080. But these 5 are recommended. These 5 are going to get us far enough down the road to say like 2060, where we don't really need to make the other, handful recommended. They can sit as an alternate until we reevaluate this water plan in the next cycle, during the 7th cycle. And so it also is nice for an entity because you can have that backup plan, which means we want to drill a groundwater well, but then we also need the infrastructure to connect the well to the wastewater or the distribution system. But that piece of the project doesn't need to be recommended right now. It can be an alternate. Or you want a well in this location and a well in a different location, but you really think the well in location A is going to be the better path, but you want to keep the well in location B in the plan as an alternate in case, as the entity continues to move forward with their project, something changes and they can always make an alternate strategy a recommended strategy. But it's sitting there in the plan to be seen for eligibility to apply for funding if need be. All right, those are some of the frequently asked questions. Are there others that I didn't address or that you have that you're curious about? And then we'll wrap it up with one more slide. Okay. Lastly, this is kind of our Far West Texas working schedule. This will be presented to the executive committee members and then the general public when we do the meeting next week. And what I am proposing is kind of a cadence of planning group meetings that we'll need to have in order to get these draft plans out for review, offer some feedback time. Next meeting, we need to approve those, but then this next batch is out for review, and so on and so forth. If we want to tackle, 10 chapters and then have the whole plan approved as a draft ready to go to the board by March 3rd. So we've got our meeting next week, and then sometime in October, we'll circle back. We'll approve some of the chapters that have been out for review, get that off our plate, and then we'll have some new chapter drafts ready to go for review and discussion and then feedback. The red circle is just indicating that I know we're around holidays. I'm not sure if it's going to be harder for the planning group to meet around Thanksgiving or harder for them to meet around Christmas, but we need to pick one or the other. So either we'll have a meeting in November and take December off, or have a meeting in December and take November off. So pretty much a meeting every month between now and the end of February, because that draft has to go to the board by March 3rd. With the exception of November and or December. And that kind of will keep us on track and hit those deadlines and get the draft plan in a final state to go out for the board for their public. They actually have like a 90-day comment period. So they'll take all the regional water plans and they'll spend 3 to 6 months combing through them, making sure that the consultants and the planning groups met every little line item on the guidance document. And then they send back the draft plan to the consultants and say, okay, here are your comments. And so that you're not alarmed, those comments often are like 5, 6, 7 pages long. It's just how the board operates. They're very tedious, and that's okay. And then the planning group and the technical consultant have to address every single comment and get it ready for the final that goes out to them. And that pretty much is regional water planning in a nutshell, very much focused on Region E. So I know not Monica, but Megan is joining us today from a different engineering firm and is new to regional water planning, but was coming in to be a part of their planning group. And just like you, kind of got caught midway through the planning cycle and was a little lost when the alphabet soup was being spun around in conversation. So I invited Megan to join us so she could hear some of the basics of planning, but sorry, Megan, that it was, very focused on Region E, but I think you kind of get the general idea.
Yeah, this was really helpful. Yeah, really helpful with kind of laying out the basics and making some sense of the soup.
Yes, yes. And feel free to continue connecting with me as you make your way through regional water planning for AGS. And likewise to Roberto and Raquel and John and Peggy. I'm here working, but I love to be able to share with new members, some of the basics, because it's really the heartbeat of the process, and it helps me to be reflective on those kind of cornerstones, because a lot of times we get caught up in our meetings and we just get focused on what needs to be done with the agenda that day. And this kind of allows me to, relish in some of the basics that got me very interested in planning way back when. So, okay, Peggy, I know that we are at the top of the hour, a few minutes over. So I'll just pause and see if there's any other comments. But I appreciate everybody joining and taking the time to, be a part of today's presentation.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Are there any questions, or should I could stop the recording and we can ask more questions if you have them. I'll just stop it for length's sake. Okay.